the drive to acquire money is addictive, and it tends to be exploitative, and therefore it's socially injurious. If you're a low surplus society and somebody makes a lot of money, the only way to make it is by making somebody else poor. And most societies try to avoid that. Western civilization in Greece and Rome was an exception. Today's world is dividing between two opposing camps, and the antagonism between the United States and China is not simply rivals for the same system, competing to make companies. It's a clash of economic systems. The United States is not trying to become a manufacturing power. It's voluntarily deindustrialized itself and given that role to China to avoid having to pay wages to its own labor force. So the US corporations make profits by deindustrializing the economy, not by industrializing it. The question is, how is a country that's deindustrializing going to get most of the wealth of the whole world, China's wealth, Russia's wealth, Europe's wealth, the global South wealth? How will it get all into itself if it doesn't have any industry, if all it has is military power and control of the oil trade? You can think of America as President Obama and John McCain characterized Russia. It's an oil station with atom bombs. Now, China's not trying to make money primarily financially. When the Central Bank of China creates money, it's not to buy stocks and bonds to push up the value of the stocks and bonds that a financial class has, as in the United States. It's planning to spending money into the economy as a whole, to develop infrastructure, to create the basic needs, to create what an economy physically and tangibly needs to go forward. So in the very first look, this seems to be a conflict between finance capitalism in the United States and industrial socialism in China. But what I want to talk about today is it goes further than this. Professor Huang mentioned my background as an economist, but for 25 years, I worked with Harvard University's anthropology department, putting together a group of Assyriologists, Egyptologists, and archaeologists, writing a history of how did the economic practices of civilization actually begin. And when you look at this, you realize that Eurasia, the whole world, up until classical Greece and Rome, up until about 2,000 years ago, the whole world had a similar philosophy. It was not a financial philosophy. The whole idea is, how do you keep an economy stable and avoid the maldistribution of land? All of this changed in the Western civilization. And I want to emphasize how much different Western civilization has been for 2,000 years. And America's fight for neoliberalism isn't simply a fight for what is happening in America. It's a fight for what happened in the Roman Empire. Because the United States today is taken over by a military oligarchy that's very much like the Roman Empire. It's not making money at home because the financial oligarchy has impoverished the rest of the economy. That's what happened in Rome. And the only way the United States or Rome or all of the empires in between, England, Holland, Spain, could make money was by exploiting foreign countries. So that's the real difference between the United States and China today. China is trying to make prosperity at home, not to extract it from other countries. The United States and the Western countries, Europe, the NATO countries, can no longer make prosperity at home. All they can do is take, and all they can do is enforce this, is to try to convince other countries that their way of doing something is really the best way to do it. And we know that that was a failure in history, and that's what I want to talk about. So suppose you're 2,500 years ago, and you're the ruler of any country. The great challenge facing every society in history has been how do you conduct trade and credit without letting merchants and creditors make money by exploiting their customers and debtors. This was the problem that ancient China had 2,000 years ago. India had. Almost every country put creditors and merchants at the bottom of the social scale. The idea was to prevent debt from growing up, to prevent people making money financially in a way that exploited other people. And all of antiquity, if you look at the philosophers of from Greece and Rome all the way to Lao Tzu to Buddha, there was a common understanding that the drive to acquire money is addictive, and it tends to be exploitative, and therefore it's socially injurious. If you're a low surplus society and somebody makes a lot of money, the only way to make it is by making somebody else poor. And most societies try to avoid that. Western civilization in Greece and Rome was an exception. Greece and Rome had basically was all about exploitation. There was a philosophical fight over this in 2,500 years ago. The Greek had a word, the love of money, silver mania. Wealth was addiction, and they saw that it was addiction. And how are you going to keep people from wanting to get rich by exploiting others? Well, that was the Greek concept of hubris. Avarice and greed were basically to be avoided. But how do you avoid it without without putting in place a set of laws to prevent it? Well, the way ancient societies avoided this was to have rulers giving them the power to prevent a oligarchy, a wealthy creditor class or a merchant class from taking over. They were given enough power to make sure that the population was free of debt, that the small cultivators had their own land, and that they weren't going to fall into debt and become bond servants or slaves of the creditors, because if they were, then they wouldn't be available to fight in the army, and they wouldn't be available to perform public corvée labor, to build palaces and roads and all of the infrastructure that most countries relied on labor. And if there were rulers to behave selfishly, they tended to be overthrown, or else the population would run away, or maybe they'd support a rival country that was invading them. But the whole idea was that rulers had to promote overall prosperity. Well, that's supposed to be what democracy is all about. But democracy in the West has not been very effective in checking the emergence of a financial oligarchy. Democracy really has tended to evolve into oligarchy. That's what Aristotle said. They evolve into oligarchy, and the oligarchy tends to make itself into a hereditary aristocracy. And the question is, how are you going to prevent this? Well, just imagine that this was the overall morality of everybody 2,500 years ago was how do you have a fair society that keeps people from falling into bondage? Well, there was not any archaic Milton Friedman to say that greed is good. There was no concept. Nobody 25 years ago would have said what the Chicago School, what the American neoliberals say. No one said, everybody help society by making as much money as you can. And if you can make money by making other people poor, that's Darwinian evolution, and that's how societies go forward. Nobody said anything about that. All of that is new, but basically it all comes from what happened in classical Greece and Rome that was quite different from everything else. So to understand what happened in the West and where civilization went wrong 2,000 years ago, you have to realize that, imagine the whole map of the world. On the western periphery, there was the Mediterranean and the Aegean. Italy, and Greece. This was way in the West. They were what today you would call barbarians compared to the East. Well, to make matters worse, in about 1200 BC, there was really bad weather. We're talking about global warming today. There was a drought, and the population throughout the whole Eastern Mediterranean shrank tremendously. There were whole peoples, that tribes and groups that had to move because the land wasn't producing enough to live. So there was a shrinkage, and there had been palace economies in Mycenaean Greece and Bronze Age Greece in the second millennium BC. All of these emptied out. And between 1200 BC and 750 BC, there was just everything sort of fell apart, and there were very local warlords would take over. And around 750 BC, weather began to get better again, and there began to be trade, and Syrian and Phoenician traders began to sail west to trade, and they sailed to Greece and Italy, and they brought civilization, Eastern civilization, to the West. And one of the things they brought, if you're going to do trade, everything has to operate on credit. They brought the idea of charging interest to the West. The first interest was developed in the Middle East, in Sumer and Babylonia, in what is now Iraq, by the palace economies. And interest and money and the use of silver and weights and measures to see how much silver you're exchanging, all of that was developed in the Bronze Age, along with contracts and all of the techniques that modern society uses. So all of a sudden, these were brought to barbarian regions where there were very local warlords. And the historians of Greece in the 7th and 6th century BC call them mafia-like states. They were just a few families managed to get control of the land, and they held most of the Greek population in bondage, in slavery. And almost one country after another, from Sparta in Greece to up to Athens and to the Greek islands and Corinth, reformers came to power. Reformers overthrew the families, and they were called tyrants. And tyrants mean you have enough power to overthrow the families, cancel the debts, and give the land to the people. They weren't democratically elected. There was no democracy yet, but by overthrowing the old mafia type families, that would be like America overthrowing the billionaires today. They prepared the groundwork for democracy. Something very, they were very progressive in the 7th and 6th centuries. Something similar occurred in Rome. Rome's history talks about the kings, and the kings made Rome a very powerful country by giving everybody land. Nobody wanted to live where Rome was because it was near the Tiber River, and there were a lot of mosquitoes there, and it was very hilly land. And so the leaders said, okay, anybody who wants to come, we're going to give land. We're going to give them their own land. They can become our citizens. If you're being enslaved by your local mafia-like leaders in Etruria and the rest of Italy, come to us. And so Rome became a magnet for immigrants, and they grew. And the king said, how are we going to prevent an oligarchy from developing? Well, every Roman king was not chosen from the rich people, from the wealthy families. Every king was appointed from another city-state, so that they wouldn't have any loyalty to a particular family. And that was Rome's great period of growth under the kings, not the democracy. But in 509 BC, the oligarchy overthrew the kings. They said, the kings are arrogant. They're trying to tell the oligarchy what to do. It was a violent revolution. The oligarchy took over and wrote a constitution that was different from what had been everywhere else in the world. Everywhere else in the world had debt cancellations regularly. All throughout the Near East, every ruler who would come to power would cancel the debts, redistribute the land to prevent an oligarchy from ending up with the land, to prevent an oligarchy from ending up with the labor. But in Rome and Greece, they had no tradition of palace rulers doing this because they didn't have palaces, because all they had were the local barbarian chieftains. Well, the barbarians took over and they said, we're going to have a different rule. All the debts have to be paid. If anyone wants to cancel the debts, well, we're going to assassinate them. And for 5 centuries, there were debt revolts in Rome and Greece. Populations kept revolting, saying, we want to cancel the debts and give us the land. Again and again, the revolts were put down, and the oligarchy got stronger and stronger, and created a Senate that didn't give any democratic privileges at all to the people. You had to vote for a what was then a billionaire in order to have a choice, but your only choice was one billionaire or another billionaire. And the result was that Rome ended up conquering other countries because militarily. It was not producing much at home. It would conquer other countries. It would loot all of their money, loot their temples, loot the palaces, melt down the gold and silver. And that's how Rome was able to build up its money supply, not by trade, but by military force. You may begin to see a parallel with the modern United States, but the same thing happened with Spain in the 16th century when it discovered the New World. It happened with England and England's empire, and it happened again today. So if you understand how the Western civilization developed in a way that contained the seeds of its failure today, its decline and fall, you have to realize that in the historical record, Rome and Greece were the only countries to begin privatizing what was public in other countries. They didn't have any palace ruler to run things, or a group of trained technicians to say, here's how we're going to plan a society to go ahead. It was basically an autocracy, a landed aristocracy that really ended up leading to feudalism. Well, right now in the United States, the neoliberals have their kind of Bible, and it's a book by Frederick Hayek called The Road to Serfdom. And he said the road to serfdom is a strong government. By a strong government, he meant a government strong enough to prevent an oligarchy from taking over, to prevent a financial class from taking over, getting the rest of the population in debt, and then reducing it to debt bondage, and taking the land and making other clients just dependent on the landowners. Well, the result of all this in Rome was the real serfdom. The Roman economy declined and fell, and that led to serfdom. So serfdom is the result of the oligarchy taking over and impoverishing the economy. And essentially, that's what's been happening to the United States and Europe since 2008. And what distinguishes the Western society from Asian society and the Near East was the absence of debt relief to restore balance. All throughout Asia for 2,000 years, when there would be a crop failure or a disease, the rulers would say, okay, we have to cancel the debts and everybody starts all over again afresh, because otherwise you would have most of the population falling in debt to a ruling aristocracy. And under Confucianism, you would have getting a public position by general testing in a democratic way. Nothing like that occurs in the United States today. It's more or less education has become hereditary. And in order to get an education to become a manager of a corporation or a country, you have to run into very heavy debt, so heavy debt that if you're a student graduating in the United States and you don't inherit from your family a large amount of money, you won't have enough income to buy a house, even on mortgage. Banks won't lend to you. So basically, the financial colonization that's occurred of the country impoverished the country. Well, all of a sudden, you can look at the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and you can say it's really bad to have a greedy, self-serving oligarchy trying to get rich itself instead of make the whole economy better, because that collapses the economy. Well, that's not what is taught in the universities. If you look at, go to a American university and either study economics or study political science, you find that the great victory of neoliberalism, if they could create what they think is a perfect world, look at what happened in the one country they had a free hand in reshaping, the Soviet Union under Boris Yeltsin, where American advisors went and said, what you have to do is get rid of the state. You can't have a state, because if you had a state, that would prevent private banks from taking over. That would prevent a domestic billionaire class. So the neoliberals from the United States told the managers of the Russian companies, why don't you register your gas, your oil, your nickel, your public utilities, all in your own names. And instead of belonging to the state, it'll belong to you personally. And now that and so they did that. They said, okay, we've issued stock. We own it all personally. And then the Americans said, well, nobody has any money in Russia to give value to all these stocks, because we've had the crash therapy there. And so the only way you can make money on all these companies that you've privatized is to sell to the Americans. And so the Russian kleptocrats who gave their registered property in their own name began to sell their companies to the Americans. Russia became the world's leading stock market in 1995, 1996. It soared, and Michael Khodorkovsky, who headed Yukos Oil, planned to sell the whole company to Exxon, the oil company here. And America would have ended up with all of Russia's resources. So the ideal of neoliberals, where they had the ideal plan, was essentially the Americans end up buying all of your resources. It's as if the Americans went to China and said, we think the head of your electric company should just give himself all the shares, and now let him sell these shares to Americans and we'll own it. The head of your railroad would give the railroad managers all the shares, and they'd sell it to the United States. That would be what the Americans wanted, and that's what they actually expected to happen in China when it was invited to join the World Trade Organization in 2001. The idea was that China, if it followed the neoliberal plans of world trade, would end up basically being a financial colony of the United States. And the United States is different from ancient Spain or Rome or England. It doesn't have a military occupation there. It establishes its power financially. And that's what makes the American unipolar world order so central, that the whole world operates in dollars now that are created essentially by the United States by computers and put into circulation by America's military bases all over the world being spread. So the United States is able, for instance, to tell the global South countries, well, listen to the advice that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank gives you. Don't feed yourself. Buy in the cheapest market. Buy American grain and you should use your land to make plantation export crops. You have to prevent local land reform. You must not grow your own food. You must depend on the United States, and you have to essentially do to your economy what happened in Russia, which is exactly what the University of Chicago boys did in Chile after the United States assassinated its democratically elected leader, Allende, and put Pinochet in power. The ideal of the US foreign policy is colonialist because it's willing to engage in regime change. Its policy is to assassinate every foreign leader that is unwilling to let America come in and privatize its public utilities and sell these off to the United States. Well, obviously, this is, you can see that in the new Cold War with Ukraine right now. President Biden has said we need regime change in Russia. Won't somebody shoot President Putin? We've got to get rid of him. He's a new Hitler. And Hillary Clinton keeps calling Putin a Clinter, a Hitler. They are essentially calling for assassination. They are trying to back terrorist groups in Russia, in China, all around in Venezuela, Latin America, all to force what we call client oligarchies, to make these countries dependent on the United States. That's a completely different system from China's Belt and Road. And this is why the United States has announced that China is the #1 enemy of the United States. It's an enemy in the sense that it has a different economic system. And if the United States and the European economies are shrinking with unemployment, with inflation, we call it stagnation here, stagflation, stagnation and inflation, while the United States and Europe are going further and further into debt and shrinking, China is going forward and building up its economy and building up the economies of its partner countries along the Belt and Road. Well, this is a threat to the United States because if you're Africa or Latin America, South America, or South Asian countries, who are you going to want your economy to look like? Are you going to want your economy to look like the United States with more and more economic polarization, a financial class that's getting rich, and the 99% of the population further and further in debt? Or are you going to want to look like China going forward and actually increasing your means of production and living standards? Well, as long as China exists as a success story, the Americans call that an existential threat, because the threat is one of how the economy is organized. And again, if you look at history, which I'm now going to take a long view of, this is not simply a United States policy alone. This has been the policy of Western countries for 2,000 years. It was a policy of Rome. It was the policy of feudalism in feudal Europe. It was the policy of the Spanish conquest of Latin America, taking the silver and gold that went right through its hands. It just dissipated it all. It was the policy of Holland, of England. It's a way of organizing society to permit the forward planning and the wealth to be taken by the financial sector, not by government. In the United States, the whole idea of the Federal Reserve Bank in 1913, just before World War I began, was to shift policymaking away from Washington to New York City by creating a private Federal Reserve to do what the U.S. Treasury had used to be doing. Well, Rome never was a democracy. As I told you, Aristotle said, well, democracies evolve into oligarchy. And that's exactly what's happening today. But President Biden and the State Department neoliberals accused China and any country trying to maintain its own economic independence and self-reliance of being autocratic. So what does, there's a rhetoric here, a kind of Orwellian vocabulary that juxtaposes democracy to autocracy. Well, what they call autocracy is a government strong enough to defend against a Western-oriented, excuse me, financial oligarchy from indebting the population to itself and then prying away the land and other property into its own hands. So what a democracy is whatever the American government and Wall Street says should be the leader. America said, let's tell you what democracy is in Venezuela. It's not who you Venezuelans elect as president. It's who we appoint as president. And we've appointed Mr. Guaido as president because he's promised to your country, to Venezuela, exactly what General Pinochet did to Chile. So we've appointed him to president. That's democracy. And the opposition is the autocracy you now have in Venezuela, a country that says, no, you can't take over. Our oil wealth belongs to the government to be used for the people. That is defined as autocracy, not democracy. And being able to vote for your president is not democracy unless it's appointed by the United States oligarchy. So you have to go through the language here. Well, this contrast between democracy and autocracy is exactly the rhetoric that was used in ancient Rome and Greece. There were many democratic reformers in Rome that tried to take over, and they were killed for saying, you're seeking kingship. When Julius Caesar was elected, he had supported another Senate leader who wanted to cancel the debts in Rome. Caesar was elected, and everybody thought that he was going to cancel the debts and redistribute the land. And so the oligarchy killed him. And Cicero, the sort of hired lawyer, said he wished he had been there to stick in one of the knives. They all agreed that Caesar had to be killed. The same thing happened in Greece. There were many revolutions in Greek oligarchic cities that took over. And if there was a reformer saying, no, let's cancel the debts, the oligarchs would say, you're seeking tyranny. You want to be a tyrant. And of course, it was the tyrants that canceled the debts. The tyrants were the Democrats of their day. The tyrants were the people trying to use the government for the people. But they were the good guys. They were the people overthrowing the mafia state, overthrowing the aristocracy. And that's why this whole fight that you're seeing today is just a replay of what happened in Greece and Rome. In about 2 months, I will be publishing my history of the collapse of antiquity, spelling all of this out. But I think when you look at the long picture, you see that the fight between the United States and China today is really a fight of the whole dynamic of Western civilization that's based on not canceling debts, not redistributing the land, of leaving wealth in private hands. And once land is sold, once you lose your money and land, you lose it irreversibly, as opposed to the whole circular time that you had throughout the Near East and Asia. So the problem is that the Western democracies have not proved adept at preventing oligarchies from emerging and polarizing the economy. And if you look at who's actually enacting and enforcing policies that seek to check the oligarchy today, it's only in countries that have a centralized government rather than a democracy controlled by the US. We don't know what's going to happen there. But nearly all of the non-Western societies had protection against the emergence of a mercantile or a rentier oligarchy. And that's why it's so important to recognize that what has become Western civilization represents a break from everything that went before. And what China is trying to do with its public sponsorship of wealth is to pick up the whole line of where civilization seemed to be going 2,500 years ago. Nobody expected civilization to say greed is good. Nobody expected that a civilization could survive in the way that the West has survived. That's why every country, from India to China, every country we know in Asia had a ruler to try to preserve widespread landholding, to preserve the economic balance so that the economy would not polarize, because if it polarized, either it would be impoverished or the population would simply run away. So the question is freedom or liberty. The Western college courses, if you send your students to study economics, they talk about Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill as if somehow today's economy was the kind of free market that Adam Smith and Mill in the 19th century talked about. But when they talked about a free market, they meant a market free from a landlord class, free from a monopoly class, and free from private banking. A free market was one where the government had taken over and finally freed economies from the legacy of feudalism. And it was feudalism that created a landlord class that ended up with the rents and created private banking, largely through the Christian church itself, and the papacy as the major bankers. Well, this was to be freed. And all of that seemed to be where Western civilization was going in the late 19th century. It looked like finally the West was going to join the rest of civilization and pick up where it took a wrong detour 2,000 years ago. But then World War I happened, and the oligarchy fought back, and the oligarchy changed the whole concept of free market. It used the same word that the classical economists used, the free market, but they meant a market free from government protecting the population. A market was free for the creditor class to take over, a market for the monopolists to take over, to get rid of anti-monopoly legislation, a market free for bankers to create credit for whatever they wanted to, but not for the public. And a market where it was free for politicians and billionaires to take over and have the government sell off the public railroads, sell off the public domain, sell off the land, sell off everything and privatize it, and do what Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan did, and impose neoliberalism. And neoliberalism in the United States was simply the old Roman oligarchy that led to the decline and fall, which is why the decline and fall of Rome is so much like the decline and fall of the United States today. Well, it's too late to save the US and European economies the way they are. The whole, since 1945, you had the world emerge from the war without private debt at all, because there was very little to borrow for to buy in World War II. All since 1945, there's been a vast run-up of debt that is now so large that most Americans, half of Americans don't have any savings at all. They're broke. They are in debt. If they go to school, they have student debt. If you buy a house, you go into mortgage debt. You need a credit card debt to get by. The economy is in a debt deflation and is being impoverished in the same way that Rome was. And when Asian students are sent to the United States, it's as if you think of the West as a force of nature. You think, well, what's happened in West is the future. What's happened in West is what's natural. Well, it's not natural at all. The natural fight is what China's doing and saying, we're not going to go down the road that led Rome to collapse and has led the United States and Europe to collapse. We're picking up where civilization left off 2,000 years ago. We're picking up the whole line of civilization again. So this, the Americans are fighting against this, and they have a slogan for fighting against China. And their slogan is the end of history. History is gone as far as it can. what does it mean for history to end? It means there isn't going to be any reform. There isn't going to be any change. Leave things just as they are with us in power, with us creating our dollars. And you have to use our dollars. You have to conduct your trade in dollars so that we can grab them. If you do something we don't like, then and you hold all of your savings in dollars, we can grab them. Like we've just grabbed all of Russia's dollars in the West, all of Russia's gold in the West. We've grabbed all of Venezuela's gold. And we want you to do that. That is the end of history. And we don't want history to go forward because that would be move away from a unipolar economy to a multipolar economy. And the end of history means now that we have privatization and financialization and a shift of government planning away from the political center to the economic and financial center, that's the end of history. This is perfection. We can't go anymore. Well, the irony is that in the last year, you've seen President Biden and American diplomacy help drive other countries away from all of this. They've been putting the sanctions on everything, vital computer opponents and things that China needs. They've been blocking Russia from food. They've forced Russia, China, India, Indonesia. They forced other countries to go their own way and to become independent so that America can't say, if you don't do what we want, we will stop exporting food to you and you'll starve like we tried to starve China in the 1950s after Mao's revolution. We will try to disrupt your economy and we'll grab your dollars. Well, China, Russia, and other countries are de-dollarizing and saying, well, okay, we see that that's what you're threatening to do. We're going to protect ourselves from your threat. We're going to denominate our trade and our investment and our savings in our own currencies with our own bank, independently of yours. That's why the world is dividing in two parts right now. So the end of history turned out to be very short-lived. It was a dream, but the United States still thinks that it can impose this somehow. And the end of history is what that meant was there is no alternative. This is the end of history. Well, there is an alternative. And that's what China and other countries are trying to do. And if you look over the whole sweep of ancient history, you can see that the alternative was to create a society with a strong enough government to create money and credit to finance its own growth of production and living standards, to finance itself, not create an oligarchy. And today you have China, India, Iran, and other Eurasian economies taking the first step is a precondition for a multipolar world by rejecting America's insistence that they join the United States trade and financial sanctions against Russia. There was just a big meeting in I think Indonesia, where the United States asked China to join against Russia, and you can imagine what the Chinese delegates said. Well, you want to destroy Russia so that after you destroy it, now you can do the same thing to us. You think we're crazy? And all that the United States can do is what Rome did 2,000 years ago. It says, well, there's one way to end history. We can atom bomb you all. If you think we're kidding, we're going to make sure that the presidents we elect are crazy. So you don't know what a crazy person will do. This was the policy that President Nixon developed in the 1970s. He said, I've appointed crazy people in charge of the military. So if you don't do what we want, we're just crazy enough to blow up the whole world. Well, in Russia, President Putin had a response. He said, well, who wants to live in a world without Russia? We can blow up the world too. So that's the point at which we've reached. The question is whether history will be determined militarily or by economically. And if it's economic, the United States can only maintain the prosperity of its billionaires by extracting wealth from other countries. America got rich off the trade of China, off the American companies by moving their labor to China, impoverished the labor force. They created a rust belt in America. The factories are all rusty. They've been turned into luxury housing for financial managers, but there's no industry here. Well, the whole idea is that America without industry can somehow live by exploiting other countries, but how are you going to get other countries to go along with it? That's where China is taking the lead, and for the first time, other countries have enough economic output that they don't need the United States. They can go it alone. They can depend on each other, conduct their trade on each other, and basically survive. And that is what is the hope for you is the nightmare for the United States. And the United States should be a model of what China and other countries need to avoid is you go forward.